Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Sithole Mbanga. I work for the South African Cities Network. I work there as the Chief Executive Officer. I would like to thank indeed the organizers of the session, the summit, in fact, in its entirety. And I have been asked to provide a keynote address, and I suppose a keynote address is meant to inspire the conversation. And I think because of the changed environment which we live in, standing on a podium and delivering a speech is slightly different to how you will do it online. And nonetheless, I'm going to, as much as possible, try to stick to my script so that I can give you as much inspiration as possible. I'm quite honored, I must say, to be addressing all of you, people that are in the policy-making space, people that are in the innovation space, the academia. I think most importantly, like to welcome the minister that's responsible for smart cities in Nigeria, in absentia. I'm told that he is going to be joining us at some point. I just want to say that for this particular session, we will focus on the role of government leadership and public policy in driving the objective of achieving a smart cities. I think first and foremost, what I would like to say is that urbanization in Africa is at full swing. I don't think there's anyone that questions that. UN Habitat has made pronouncements, at least from as far back as 10, 15 years back, that Africa will be the fastest urbanizing continent in the city. In it, there are a couple of principles that I think we need to consider as we are urbanizing as a continent. One of them is putting technology in place. And I suspect in part that's because the kind of population that we're dealing with in the African continent is fairly young and is very much technology savvy. They want things to be done fast. Secondly, is putting in place government systems that are responsive to the times that we're in. But I think importantly, it's for us to put the type of socio-economic development policies and an agenda which seeks to improve accountability, efficiency, and openness in the African continent. Therefore, for me, the idea of a smart city is testimony to this resolve. The African Union is known to have made pronouncements around this thing, encouraging African smart cities or African cities to become smart. There are here and there in the African continent cities that we can refer to as being smart or working towards the idea of a smart city. But I think the most important thing for me will be for us to register the fact that a move towards a knowledge-driven type of an economy increases the continent's competitiveness on a global scale. So we can't escape the fact that if we are to be a sustainable continent, we are going to need to adapt ourselves to the phenomena of a smart city. We notice that the global situation, for everything to succeed, it must be in line with technology. And I think that's not a deniable factor. Therefore, a smart city in the local context does not only refer to technological advancements or digitization. And I think for me, that is a much more better term to utilize, the term of digitization. For me, the issue of smartness and digitization, or being smart as a city, also refers to being better at delivering the basic services that people are expecting on the ground. Obviously, we differ from country to country about what the expectation of service delivery in a city is. But in South Africa, water, for instance, is a basic service that must be delivered. The question is, can we utilize optimally digitization and technology to drive that particular service? Electricity is one of them, public transportation and the likes. There's quite a number, and it will differ from one country to the other. One must also not forget that it is city governments and their leadership that drive smart city projects. I had a discussion in the build-up to the opening today, and that revealed to me that as long as we do not understand how governments work, and they're not the same, by the way, across the continent, they differ in how. In the South African context, driving a smart city is the responsibility of that particular city. It could be a metropolitan city that is as big as Cape Town or Johannesburg, and it could be an intermediary city, the size of, let's say, Richards Bay or George or whatever the case might be. Or it could be a small town that has tentacles into its rural magnets, its rural communities. So, but the responsibility to drive city smartness, city smart projects, is the responsibility of that particular of a particular municipality. National governments or the national sphere of government tends to be responsible for all sorts of supporting policies that should enable the city to thrive in its quest to being a smart city. So the idea for us in the cities network of a smart city implies governance, right? So if you do not have the correct leadership at a local level to drive the smartness of the city, the likelihood that you will be able to find traction, the type of traction that drives the smartness of the city or the town, is quite scarce. So it's quite important to understand that as long as there is no thinking, administrative leadership and political leadership at a local level to drive a smart city, then you will forever be challenged. One of the other challenges for smart cities is this thing of the regular change in leadership in government. I think it's a big problem. Our experience has been that whenever there are elections, there's going to be elections in South Africa very soon, the local government elections, there's going to be a high turnover of leadership, people that are elected as well as people that are administrative leaders. That tends to slow down the pace at which smart city projects are implemented. Governments where smart cities have been created have devoted a lot of effort to introducing a series of intergenerational policies, so that when there's a new leadership that comes to power or to office, then you are not having to start again the projects, and therefore collaboration between the various stakeholders and parties to a smart city project become quite easy to master as a consequence. For instance, government leaders should promulgate policies that support access, right, to government data. And I'm just utilizing this as an example, because one of the things that we have found in the cities network through our research is that the public sector tends to be reluctant to pass information or to share information, whether it's open source or not, firstly within itself as a sector, i.e. the government or the public sector, but also with other stakeholders. It tends, and that reluctance tends to contribute to the slowness with which the use of such an asset as data could be of relevance for innovation by those that are in the innovation sector, who are predominantly in the private sector anyway. Now, smart cities in Africa, for me, will be realized through policies and an enforcement of accountability and transparent systems, which the use of smart technologies can help measure and monitor the performance and the progress that is being made government. And I think this is a very important a point to make, that as long as we are disabled by our counterparts or by our colleagues in the public sector to gain access to how it is that they're governed, it's difficult for us as citizens to make them accountable to us. And I think it's just one other factor that we need to appreciate. There's a tendency that has emerged, at least in my observation as well, and that is the tendency to use smart cities for e-administration and for purposes of transparency, and that then enables citizens to monitor the performance of government service delivery. And I think that's a very good thing. There's quite a number of few cities that have started to do this. There's quite a notable few in the South African context. I'm not sure what's happening beyond the borders of Africa. I think the organizers might have that information, and I think it will be great if that information can be shared. Who's doing what in the African continent? There's an organization called the United Cities and Local Governments Africa. They possibly might have that type of information because they are the responsible body for all local governments in the African continent. The last time I heard was that there's plus minus 16,000 local municipalities in the African continent. And of course, that's something to be verified through the channels of the UCLG Africa, which is the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa. And I think by working with such organization, the possibilities are there for this agenda, the agenda of a smart city, to be achieved at a scale that is, effectively that has never been imagined. Let me just try to, as I approach my closing, try to focus on one thing that I think the conference organizers might also want to direct us on, and perhaps the conversation during the summit should also focus on. It's this issue that I started with, the issue of youth. We have to propel our young population that you find in African cities towards being invested in the African continent. I'm sure many of you would have heard of migration away from the African continent to Europe in particular, where young people are looking for a better life outside of the African continent. I think that our governments, and especially those that are in national governments, have a responsibility to not only capture, but to also ensure that the interests of youth are quite are taken care of. And I think for me, there is nothing that can help in capturing the interests of young people as the drive towards smart cities. And I think in that way, you would have them invested in their respective countries and in their respective cities. In the South African Cities Network, we have proposed, and I must say, we also support our government, the South African government's approach to this thing called all of society and whole of government in embarking on this, including the issue of smart cities. New technology can connect us and can deliver data, but I think if we do not have the type of leadership that thinks and acts in a smart way, I think these will remain pipe dreams. And what do I mean by smart leadership? I'm referring here to the type of leadership that can deal with the complexities of the ecosystem and the culture that is inherent in our cities. In addition, of course, to being able to synchronize both the outputs and the inputs of a smart city space, so as to be able to harness and advance the socioeconomic benefits that come with both the urbanization dividend, because there is a dividend in the urbanization. We've seen that in Europe, but also the dividend that comes, or the economic dividend that comes with the fact that we are getting smart. Just in closing, I think there's a need for a convergence of government leadership in the public space that could catalyze and unlock African smartness, African city smartness through design, for instance. I think everybody would know, especially people that study local government, they would know that local governments in the African continent, and I suspect just across the world, have gone through 3 waves of difficulties. And I'm saying this because I would like colleagues in the room to understand where the context within which municipalities are. The first wave that hits African local governments and African municipalities was the financial meltdown that took place around 2008. That really had a devastating effect on the financial sustainability of municipalities. Hence, sometimes you could think that they are reluctant to embark on projects that are about smartness. I don't think so. I think there's a difficulty of balancing their financial capability on the one hand, vis-a-vis the need to leapfrog towards becoming much more a smart city. So that was the first wave. And just immediately after that wave, around about 2012, 2013, there was a huge impact on the African continent that resulted from climate change, right? For instance, water floods in some areas and droughts in some areas, right? And therefore, the inability to produce food and to be food productive, whilst at the same time, the international policy requirements for African cities to become less reliant on fossil fuel. The combination of those 3 things that were resulting from how it is that the world was responding to climate change really then put the African municipalities and cities between a rock and a hard place, over and above the fact that there had been the 2008 financial meltdown. And the last wave of difficulty is the one that we're living in now, right? I think COVID, and maybe the effect is yet to be felt, COVID has had a devastating impact, much more devastating, or adding and compounding to the challenge that African cities have had. I mean, COVID has meant that more sources of revenue have suddenly dried up because residents are unable to pay for the services of that are offered by municipalities. COVID has also meant a change in how we live our lifestyles. It has meant a lot of changes at an institutional level, at a municipality as well. So if you run an organization such as a municipality and you have been facing troubles, organizational sustainability challenges and difficulties such as the 3 waves that I have made mention of, I'm sure that then gives you a sense of the difficulty with which municipalities are really trying to contend on how to provide services like water, energy, right? Mobility and transportation, for instance, right? Things such as health services, things such as the education services, safety, human settlements, and all of those buildings. So I think it's quite important that we understand the context in which that they're operating in, so that as we posit the idea of a smart city, we also appreciate the fact that they are unlikely to just summarily respond positively to the notion of smartness unless such a notion of smartness is also helping them deal with the challenges that they are facing. So, chairperson of the session, let me stop there, and I hope that I have managed to inspire the conversation so that we can have successful results. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sithole. I think just framing the session in those terms will be of huge benefit to the experts that we have on our panel. And hopefully we will add more people to it We need to state that the minister from Nigeria at the moment is not available, but he will come onto the session at some point.
Okay,
I just need an honor. Sorry,
I just need to say, Reuben, that I think I did speak to the organizers that I will be here until around about 10 o'clock South African time.
Thank you very much for that, sir. Maybe we'll twist your arm to say a little more about the nature of your work as we go on.
It's only a pleasure.
It's indeed an honor and a privilege to chair this session. I'm just going to be the kind of conductor of the experts that we have on this panel, who would provide all the excitement that's associated with understanding what smart cities are about. And it's all framed within a kind of context that we're still finding our feet here in South Africa and in greater parts of Africa, for that matter, and the developing world around the whole notion of smart cities and how does one actually have these rolled out, and they need to at scale. So, without taking up too much more of the time, I'm going to ask our first expert, Richard Mashut, who is a professional engineer with Zatari, who is a large consulting engineering company in Africa and around the world. And he's responsible mainly for the digital strategy, and he's passionate about working in the smart environment, paperless and so on, and sees himself as a problem solver in many ways, as most engineers are. We like the kind of, as architects, we are the kind of irritation value to engineers in most times. And I'm sure that you're going to enjoy his input this morning. Over to you, Richard.
Reuben, thank you very much, and good morning, folks. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be part of this conversation today. I am double hatting today, so I'm speaking both as an engineer that works at Zatari and also as part of our BIM community, Africa. And I'm maybe going to start off there just talking about the BIM community and who we are and what we do. A couple of years ago, I guess the conversation around building information modeling really started to get under people's skin. Everyone was talking about BIM and doing BIM and all this kind of stuff. And some people were doing BIM well and other people weren't doing BIM yet. And we realized as a collective that we needed to bring that conversation into a single chorus line so that we could understand collectively as professionals, regardless of which role we play in delivering infrastructure projects, in working in cities, in municipal contexts, whether you're part of a government or a client organization, or whether you're an architect, engineer, contractor. And so in the BIM community, we have over the last 2 years been sharing knowledge and sharing experiences in a very communal manner that enables us to essentially create a collective awareness of what is possible in technology these days, what technology is enabling us to do as professionals, and how to leverage technology effectively. Part of the value of, I guess, demystifying building information modeling, and then on the back of that, technology application in general, is that it lowers that barrier to entry of uncertainty, and it creates a higher degree of confidence amongst us as we engage in consultation with each other, as we have conferences where the agenda is not set, but we gather in a group of professionals from various different parts of the built environment to talk about how to get stuff done and how to use technology in engineering and architecture and construction to really deliver products that are ready for smart cities. Ultimately, smart cities are made up of smart people and smart infrastructure and smart systems. We've spoken quite a bit in the conversations leading up to today about the need to recognize the humanity in smartness, that cities are environments in which people live, communities thrive within cities, and a smart city, as we heard in Sithole's opening remarks, a smart city really needs to add value to the city's primary client, which is its citizens. And the environment in which those citizens are living and hopefully thriving, if it's a successful city, will consist of infrastructure that has been delivered in a manner that is commensurate with smart living. And so ultimately, as a civil engineer myself, and as one of the members of this community, and as a professional in my own company context, our focus is really around how do we deliver infrastructure that enables that smart city environment to work, and working alongside the technological environment where we're looking at Internet of Things, we're looking at connectivity. How do all of those things tie together to form a true combination of technologies and smartness that helps our cities to be healthy and thriving? Apart from that, I am also very passionate about doing things smartly, and I think that I've really enjoyed seeing how technology enables design to be more creative, and that goes across the spectrum, whether that's the tallest buildings in the world, or really smart ways of creating even rural communities and enabling those communities to thrive and to have equal access to opportunities to improve themselves, using good design principles, using collaborative design. And I think that in smart engineering, that becomes more and more possible as we leverage the tools that are available to us. And so I'm very pleased to be part of this conversation, and keen to see where it goes. Thanks, Reuben.
Thanks very much for that, Richard. I think it's like just it rounded a nice intervention around how engineers participate in the rolling out of smart cities at all levels, from a social level to the hardcore infrastructure that's required to drive a city at scale, and certainly actually introducing technology associated with BIM platforms is the platform that we all who work in the built environment who aspire to. Some of us participate in varying degrees of success, and hopefully we can build on this going forward. I think it's about the humanity as well. I think us with technical skills do get lost in the fantasy and the delight of design, and get disassociated from exactly what we're doing, which is actually deepening issues around democracy and encouraging so that there is a better life for all, in the broadest sense. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask our next speaker, Bridget Shu, who is the Regional Director for Southern Africa in an organization called Enterprise Singapore, which is a government-led organization dealing with international trade, looking at opportunities around the globe, but also spreading the word around smart interventions. I mean, they have a program called not Smart Cities, but Smart Nation, which is actually the entire country being driven around the issue of the introduction of technology at massive scale in all levels of society and in life. And I'm sure that Bridget will talk to us about how technology is advancing the trade initiatives around the development of Singapore's trade links around the world, and more specifically around Southern Africa. So over to you, Bridget.
Thanks so much, Reuben. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be on this panel, to have the opportunity to exchange insights and also sharpen ideas on how we can collectively build better cities. Before I kind of maybe jump into sharing just a little bit of context about Singapore, just sort of expand on sort of Reuben's introduction on what I do. So Enterprise Singapore, we are a Singapore government agency that helps Singapore companies build capabilities. And we also help them to expand overseas. Part of our mandate is also about building Singapore as a commodity trading hub, as well as a startup hub. So we support and facilitate the vibrancy of these various ecosystems. And this also includes welcoming foreign companies into Singapore as well. So I'm based in Joburg and I cover the whole of Southern Africa. In South Africa, we are also the trade office in the High Commission of Singapore over here. So today I'm very grateful to be able to share, with you a little bit about Singapore, and I hope it would be valuable in some form. I think it's also important to recognize that no two cities are completely alike, even within a country. The circumstances that shape us are very different, and our very experiences and approaches would hopefully provide a rich field for mutual learning. So I think the first thing to recognize about Singapore is that we are a city-state, which means that the country is the city, and they're kind of, the same for us, and that we are very small. To give you some context, it takes 1 hour to drive from one end of Singapore to the other end. So our natural constraints is really, we don't have natural resources, and we don't have space, and sort of manpower is also always an issue for us. So our relationship with technology is a little bit different, where we have to embrace technology, and it is a necessity for us to overcome a lot of these natural constraints. So then kind of that sort of frames our approach to thinking about us as a smart city or as a smart nation, as Reuben mentioned. For us, our vision for Singapore to be a smart nation is really a nation where people live meaningful and fulfilled lives, enabled by technology and offering exciting opportunities for all citizens. And this also includes businesses that are within Singapore as well. And underpinning that, the objectives is really about, just to kind of reiterate what Richard mentioned as well, about improving citizen well-being, and also really looking at environmental sustainability and also promoting economic development. So the way that we sort of, come up with our own framework is to really think of it in three main pillars. So the first being about a digital government, digital society, as well as digital economy. So digital government, I think as the name suggests, really about strengthening digital capabilities within the government. How do you integrate services to make it a lot easier for public service delivery, for citizens to be able to interact with the government, and also to be able to co-create solutions together. Digital society is also really about enhancing and expanding digital access for inclusivity, for all parts of society. While digital economy is also looking at the various industries that technology and sort of, both Industry 4.0, Services 4.0 is able to afford businesses, and sort of for them to be able to provide it as a service, and sort of thrive and flourish, right? And sort of all this kind of underpinning, really, I think when we're talking about smart cities, we sort of often think about it in sort of the physical environment of physical infrastructure. And sort of that's, I guess, understandable, it's sort of the most visible, but it's also important to realize that there are many other domains for a smart city, right? It cuts across from health to transport, of course, urban living, but finance and also education. And each one of these are important. And in Singapore's context, many of these various domains are led by different ministries. But how we try to coordinate our approach is that it all is sort of reported or worked together with the Smart Nation and Digital Government Office, who sort of oversees many of the key strategic projects that the government has decided to prioritize and to execute collectively. And the reason why we call this a smart nation rather than a smart city is actually to really emphasize and to send a very clear signal to everyone that it is a whole of nation effort that is required. It's not just whole of government, but the whole of nation, including our population and our citizenry. So for us at Enterprise Singapore as a government agency, we are also very involved in our efforts to building Singapore as a smart nation, primarily by working very closely with the private sector, as that's kind of our main bread and butter. So in Singapore, we work with Singapore companies to either adopt many of these digital solutions, or as well to actually help them build capabilities, build new products and services to be able to offer it, and also to be able to contribute to the building of a smart city, both in Singapore and also in overseas markets. We also help to create the ecosystem, which means sort of, working together with government agencies or with corporates to design or to be able to really articulate first what is the problem statement that each one of them are facing. We often believe very strongly in a demand-led innovation approach, where you must be able to identify, what the problem is, and then sort of the solution that emerges, can address the problem, and sort of, rather having a project because, it looks good, or, that one, I think at the end of the day, really wouldn't be very sustainable. So we try to facilitate those kind of conversations, and bringing in the private sector, because they are very important in sort of, coming up with, they're a lot more innovative most of the time than people in the government ever could be. So creating all these platforms, we've created various innovation labs, and also sort of designated various parts of Singapore as almost sort of a living test bed, which is, where people live in as sort of the district where companies and also the government can kind of work together to co-create some of these solutions. I'll probably just stop right here before I kind of continue, sort of, hand it back to Reuben before I sort of ramble on.
But you're not. I think it's important for us. I thought you were going to go into a little bit more detail around that idea of actually a living lab, and almost a kind of public-private partnership between government, the government, business, and the citizen. So. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I can. So I guess in Singapore, the way that many of our country is divided in terms of living districts, or we sort of call them neighborhoods. So one of the districts that you can sort of go and search on is called Punggol. So this has been a district that has been designated where companies are able to come in to work with government to test bed many of these solutions. So I think for us, a key priority is really also about energy efficiency and also water management. Those, I think, for us as a city are very important for the overall long-term sustainability of our country. So for that, it's really almost like, I guess, in the financial sector, you hear a lot of a sandbox. This is almost like a sandbox in sort of a built environment sense. So that's kind of one example. The other example that maybe just to share is we have a smart urban co-innovation lab. It's actually private sector led as well. It was kind of championed by one of our companies called CapitaLand, and it's then supported by government agencies in Singapore, including Enterprise Singapore. And the intention is to actually bring in both large tech companies, right? Your Microsoft, your IBMs and the like, but also your startups who are very nimble and may be able to create many of these solutions very efficiently and quickly as well. And sort of, within that lab environment to test bed some of these solutions as well. So hope that kind of gives you a little bit more flavor. Yeah.
I wonder if we can bring in Richard in the conversation, just around, because all of those things that Bridget's raised are discussions that are happening in South Africa around participation in different agencies and different organizations in both the private and public sector engaging. And these companies that she's mentioned are not names that are alien to us. They're here. And why is it that we battle with engaging with them at the same kind of level. Richard?
Yeah, so I think the engagements are happening. Maybe I'm going to take a little bit of a step back. So I totally agree with Bridget's, design-led approach. It's very close to our heart as well. Engaging and understanding the problem, understanding, what's really needed. It's very important. What I've noticed is what happens next. Once one arrives at understanding the problem and start formulating a solution, you're then stuck in this wilderness, or maybe it's a zoo, I don't know, of too many options, too many formats, too many technologies, too many possible solutions, too many silos. And I repeatedly see very, very smart solutions that are isolated from each other, being implemented in various different contexts. So this department decides to buy this type of software and this type of system and implement it. But then that's not compatible with the next department. And so then those departments can't share information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One city builds an entire smartness, but if you move from city A to city B, you've got to rewire your entire life because everything is running on a different bespoke system. So that to me is one of the challenges. Another one of the challenges is that because I think in many instances the decision makers' baseline understanding of the solutions is quite low. There's a high dependency on external service providers to come and make things happen. And then you're not driven by a uniform approach, a uniform standard to solving things, but you're driven by a bias that comes from a successful service provider that is tendered for work. So all of this points to the need to have some kind of a means to reduce the bias, to eliminate the bias, and to create a greater sense of consistency. One thing that's true in the digital world is that everything is connected to everything else, so it needs to be compatible. If it isn't compatible, then you're actually limiting yourself and you're limiting the potential of whatever smartness you're building. A big need that we've identified in the BIM community, and it overflows then into architecture, engineering, construction, management, asset management facilities, is the need for a standard. It's the need for a centralized, accepted, adopted standard for information management, for digital systems, for digital security, etc. Now, worldwide, these standards exist. There are multiple ISO standards available that specify things like information security across IoT networks, that look at security for data storage systems. We're seeing some organizations that are putting projects out to tender and requesting work. We're seeing some of them start specifying some of these standards, but it's not uniform. So that is one of the building blocks, I think, that we need to enable what Bridget was talking about. Because yes, that sense of creating solutions, that's fortunately, and I'm very grateful for it, that's starting to become more and more regular in our way of thinking. It's no longer funny to be involved, in a workshop to discuss something, but we're gathering and we're trying to co-create solutions. Once you've got that idea, once you've got that sort of pencil sketch or whiteboard sketch of what you want to do, then how do you actually implement that? And in a smart city context, that's always going to involve some technology, but that technology needs to be unified so that we can bring them together and that we can make them talk to each other.
Thanks for that, Richard. Look, I think with all of these things, the elephant in the room is always funding. Within the South African context, putting aside for a moment procurement skepticism, there's a whole bunch of other words that I could use to describe it. How is it, and I think it's a question to both of you, is how, in your mind, should funding sources and funding mechanisms be put in place in order to advance these programs? We'll start with you, Bridget, and then Richard.
Yeah, sure. I think in Singapore's context, a lot of the smart city or smart nation efforts is really driven by the government, and sort of therefore it is funded by the government as well off our own balance sheet. And I think it's in this day and age, it can be a very tall order, especially sort of given the pandemic. A lot of our resources are being diverted to deal with the pandemic and sort of the after effects of it. So I think that's important to sort of recognize. And then so as a result, it's then important to bring in, other partners that can work with you on this. So for example, your development finance institutes or even sort of your private sector banks as well. So in Singapore, something else that we've been working on is an Infrastructure Asia office, where the idea is really for Singapore to become a network where many of these infrastructure players, are based in Singapore or have that opportunity to network. And that's important because that helps to socialize the ideas and kind of project pipeline of what is taking place within sort of the broader Asia context. And then this helps many of your banks or your financial sector players to kind of be able to see how they want to participate and also to be very excited about wanting to play a role in funding these projects as well that can, suit, many various objectives. So I think that's important to kind of, first government create that, decide what is this that you want to pursue, and also then bring all these people together. If you don't have the resources, kind of solicit help from people who actually have and can participate together with you and to be able to work with them collaboratively. So that's kind of one. I think the other part also about bringing in the private sector as well, in maybe it could be a PPP kind of model or perhaps, various other business models. I think right now we are seeing a lot of very innovative business models that can actually help to fund some of these projects as well. So I think many of these projects would involve some kind of an initial, potentially high.
What would some of those models be?
Yeah. So it's kind of maybe giving you sort of two examples that we have seen. So in Singapore, there's sort of one company that originally started as an air conditioned leasing company, right? Very traditional kind of business model, so helping to provide cooling systems to various buildings or industries. And right now, I think as we have all seen, there is really a move towards a platform kind of economy or something as a service type of business model. And similarly, they have also kind of gone down that track and they've called themselves aircon as a service, right? So the idea that actually they recognize many of these real estate or property developers don't want to own the assets of maintaining or having to procure and maintain many of these air-conditioned units. And so this company kind of comes in to be able to provide that as a service. And because they now have are able to have many air-conditioned units deployed across the country or in overseas as well, they actually are able to collect a lot more data on sort of every building is quite different in terms of how you cool the system, how you cool the building. In different countries, the humidity, everything really plays a lot of factors. And so now they're able to collect a lot more data on how do you actually cool a building a lot more efficiently, how do you maintain it, do predictive maintenance as well, and sort of intervene at a much earlier stage. So that's kind of one where actually it's more of a service model. So it's actually overall becomes a bit cheaper for sort of the building owner. That's kind of one. The other model is sort of maybe charging on a transaction basis, for example. So we have seen one company do this where it's energy efficient solution. And the initial installation can be quite high, but they've decided to actually absorb it. And sort of how they then charge or how they make their money is actually the cost savings that the building owner, the property owner is able to make. They then take a cut out of the savings. So it requires a lot of faith and kind of, trust between the relationship, and also a lot of confidence that your solution will actually work. So for this particular company, they are so confident that their solution works. So they'll bring in sort of a third-party consultant to kind of make an analysis of how much cost savings the owner would actually make. And then they will kind of agree with the owner what is the percentage that you will take of this that they are already saving. So it's not money that they are actually spending out of their own pocket. So these are just kind of some examples where if you kind of think creatively, there are some ways to be able to actually work together with the private sector to execute some of these projects. Maybe perhaps to offer up a third option as well is, I was kind of sharing with both of you before this panel started, is actually kind of maybe also to involve the public in really kind of seeing that all this would have an impact on your day-to-day life as well. So at the start of this year, we launched the Digital for Life movement, which is really kind of a initiative to involve the public in sort of recognizing that, you know, all these digital solutions, it's kind of a lifelong effort, you know, from the time that you are young all the way up to, you know, when you're an elderly citizen as well. And you kind of have to constantly upskill yourself, also be involved and interact with many of these solutions. And also and it's also sort of part of our effort to ensure that no one is also excluded as we kind of become more digital. So there are various programs to be able to introduce, you know, coding, robotics to our young ones, and also how do we help the elderly to be connected. You know, firstly, kind of teaching them, like, you know, how to use WhatsApp, how to use Zoom, all those kind of services, and also how do you apply for various public services or maybe financial support that you might require, for example. And actually for this campaign, we actually launched a public fundraising effort. It was under sort of a President's Challenge that was launched. And so corporates actually donated to the effort, and also ordinary citizens also participated. And where the government came in was a 1-for-1 matching grant. So whatever the private sector and the citizens donated, we matched it. That is how the movement is being funded. So that's potentially a third option in terms of kind of really looking at how do you know, crowdsource, if you will, funding for what it is that you want to do.
Thanks very much for that. Richard, you want to add to that? But I also think let's touch on the example that we spoke about before we came on this morning, the hot day example as well. Thanks, Richard. Over to you.
Sure. No, I will definitely touch on that. But I think, yeah, Bridget, I was just busy scanning through some of my notes that I'd made, and so many great touch points there. The idea of crowdsourcing by involvement, I think, is so powerful. So when I think about where is the money going to come from? Well, the money's either going to come from someone who's going to, you know, lend it to whoever's developing, or it's going to come from central government, or it's going to come from, you know, individuals. And so you've got these various different role players in building a smart community, let's call it. And I really see a huge opportunity for government to enable. You know, we've got a lot of smart people. You know, we've got very, very smart professionals that are qualified and able to do the things that need to, you know, be done by engineers or architects or technology developers. But we've got very, very smart people who are just part of our citizens, you know, kids at school that are growing up and learning about things and ideas that come from their side. And to me, part of the secret of going from not smart to smart as a city is to enable that natural evolution to take place. And so, Bridget, the examples that you quoted are, to me, examples of that natural evolution. You create the ecosystem, you create the environment, and people rise to the opportunity. They also, when given an opportunity to grow out of struggle, for example, I think the human nature is to do that. When an opportunity presents itself, innovation, I think, is peaked, you know, from a position of struggle. And it is very sad how many people on the continent are struggling. And I think that the opportunity that could be presented by government providing the network infrastructure, providing internet accessibility, providing access to technology, providing regulations that enable people to operate under innovative business models. Those things are very exciting because it then totally decentralizes the responsibility to come up with a clever idea. It doesn't need to be the small group that's clever. It's the bigger group that can be clever, and working within that framework of you are allowed to be clever. Here are the tools. Here are the basics that without which you cannot develop smart solutions. So in the example we were talking about, Reuben, the settlement right next to Hout Bay in the Western Cape, and I'm just trying to find its name, Imizamoyetu. I was just reading a paper about how that community have used digital media through smartphones, and we're not talking about the top-end smartphones, but just a phone that's got the capability to run the Facebooks, to do video streaming, etc. With the help of a micro network, so that within that community, people have got access to Wi-Fi, using a TV channel, a local TV channel, to share information, to now during COVID, during lockdown, to have zero-rated content that the children can watch, that's linked to educational content, etc. That's incredible, and it's exposing. I mean, Sithole was talking about our youth. It's exposing little children in that community to interacting with knowledge on your phone. That is magical. And those children are growing up with that as their baseline. And so they're preconditioned as they're growing into their teenage years to be thinking about smarter ways of doing things. And that is beautiful. It's an evolutionary process of allowing our communities through providing that access. The question that you asked, Reuben, was about where the money should come from. And I believe it should come from Treasury. I totally agree with Sithole. It needs to be centralized. It cannot be within a certain silo of government, to provide, because each department in government has KPIs, and so those are on the one hand going to enable, but on the other hand they're going to hamstring development. So some of the basic services needs to be provided, I believe, through National Treasury, and then through a coordinated committee or council, or I don't know what kind of a format it would be, but participants in that group would be representative of government, of strategic planning, of professional organizations, of commercial organizations, to really have a team approach to saying, this is what we need as a country, as a continent. This is how we are going to get things better. So, Bridget, just listening to you talk about Singapore, it's inspiring to think about this idea of we need to work. We need to make this successful because our future depends on it. What Sithole was talking about, initiatives that survive the transitions between electoral periods. What we're talking about in smart cities, it is way bigger than the electoral cycle. It is way longer term than any individual's office. And so that I believe is part of what we need to accomplish in our various different environments, is saying, this is big. This is big, and it's all of us. And it can be everyone. If there was one thing that, the digital world has brought the globe into a global village. And I think that it's going to do the same in our communities. It's going to do the same in our country, and it is going to bring us together in a way that I don't think we've anticipated yet.
But also, isn't the whole idea of the different scales of funding from the national treasuries and small and global funding institutions, together with the one person approach with some of the programs that Singapore had? And it's this various scales that would advance a program of this nature. Because if we still only rely on a single source, we will run into problems and we will remain where we are currently.
It's a little bit like trying to drive your car with your starter motor. You need a starter motor to kick the engine over, but then it's got to start running itself. And I very much see the central funding as that starter motor. It's the spark that starts everything off. And once you've got the necessary infrastructure that enables people to innovate, to start running with ideas, then you don't need to keep running that starter motor,
We're getting towards the end of the session, and I'm wanting to find out from the host whether they've been able to locate the good minister from Nigeria. Or should we just deal with some closing remarks? Guidance, please. Just looking at the questions. Yeah, look, the minister apparently is struggling to log in. So needs to sort out his smart city in Nigeria. There's one question here, but I think we've answered it. It's from Bjorn Schmidt, who asks, apart from the idea of implementing smart solutions and the funding thereof, how does one go about transform the government regulations, policies, procurement practice of government entities, getting the paradigm shift to smart systems? And I guess we've kind of like covered the bulk of that, but do you want to add anything more to that? Anybody?
I'd love to hear from Bridget. What was your journey like?
Well, our journey actually really started back in the 80s, I would say. Even before, I guess, smart cities, smart nations was really a thing. At that time, I think the imperative was more about, when computers were first being introduced, how do you actually use computers in the government? How do you also build an IT literate population as well? And then sort of over time, it evolved into putting in place the ICT infrastructure, kind of working together with our overall master plans. So for Singapore, one thing to know about us is we're very obsessed with planning. We love our 50-year master plans, which we then have a 30-year master plan, which is revised every 5 years to constantly ensure that they are up to date and relevant to the needs of our country at each point in time. So it really involves a lot of planning, I would say. But I think coming really to the question that is being asked, I think it's firstly for this paradigm shift to happen, it's for government first to actually internalize the importance of a smart city, right? I think first you need to be convinced of it and not see this as something that is a good to have, but it's important. And it's important firstly for a few reasons, right? It's about the resilience of a city to be able to respond and adapt much faster to new challenges and also anticipated problems, right? Say in COVID, it really disrupted a lot of public service delivery and the way certain things are done. How do you use technology in a way that can help you perhaps distribute certain goods and services a lot more efficiently, for example? Next is really also about having a more integrated approach in terms of sort of your use of resources. When you're able to collect a lot more data and sort of for sustainability, you kind of know what is available to you, what is not available to you, and how do you actually also manage your own environment footprint. And then also I think it's building for the future. How do you actually future-proof your city, especially if your city continues to grow, and also really as part of that to create new engines of growth and innovation as well. So I think governments would first need to recognize that, and then I think how do you implement it? We try not, I think, especially with grand master plans, I think it's also very important to recognize what are your very low-hanging fruits, or your quick wins, as you might call it as well. Because I think for both, there will always be skeptics within the government, also within the population, right? About smart city, not for me. Why do we need to spend money on it? So there needs to be that kind of quick win to actually convince. And sometimes these quick wins, in one project that one of our company has been involved in another country that I've seen, is they actually advise them, okay, maybe the smallest project that you can do is actually create a government directory where, all of the government officials or the people that, the citizens actually need to know are all listed online. That's very simple, right? And so whenever there is, for the waste collection, it didn't happen today. Or I know actually
there might be pushback for that here.
I mean, that's just an example, not necessarily applicable here, but that was what happened in that particular city that they sort of advised. It was something very simple that actually didn't cost a lot at all, because they already had it internally. It was just to kind of collate and ensure that this directory was updated. So something very small, and then so the population can see, actually, this makes my life better.
Richard, you want to close? You've got a minute.
I'm excited about what we can do with technology. I agree with what Bridget has described, and I think that our journey is starting. And I think what you've described in terms of starting with just how do we use computers, in some instances, that's a relevant question for all of us. I think our children are growing up into an environment that is going to be very different to what we grew up in. And I think that we've got to help them be ready for it, and we've got to build that future for them. And yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to share. And Bridget, thank you for sharing what you've shared as well. It's been really inspirational. Thank you, Reuben.
Thank you very much to both of you. This session has been wonderful. It's been a learning experience for an old architect who relies on just his pen. So thank you very much. I think it was most enjoyable. And I now need to make an announcement that the next session starts at 10:45 for all the attendees. And good luck with the rest of the sessions. And thank you again very much to both of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.